Minecraft's richest villager once held the entire world within his grasp. No mob would dare stand up to him unless they wished for death. However, not everything can last forever, and his greed would eventually catch up with him. Vicious in his search for wealth, he would raid other villages for their valuables and lay heavy taxes on his subjects, leaving most of the world in poverty. His diamond golem, his most trusted friend in the world, was there to protect him if the villagers ever fought back. The king's greed saw no bounds, especially if the taxes were not paid.
This must be a mistake. We've already paid our taxes.
Liar, you must die.
Please, not in front of my son.
Dad, no!
It's okay, Robin. It will all be okay.
The king slayed the villager as his son ran in fear. Only thinking of his greed, the king walked off, not considering his actions. But Robin would never forget. After having collected taxes from the nearby village, the wealthy villager returned to his castle with his golem guards in tow. He was not only the richest, but also the self-proclaimed king of all villager kind. The villager king's advisor ran up to him and explained that there had been an error. This village had paid their dues just last week. The king immediately became enraged with the advisor
I never make mistakes.
and ordered his iron golems to lock him away in the dungeon. In an attempt to calm himself, the king began to admire the incredible wealth that he had acquired over the years. These riches were the result of relentless mining missions and heavy taxation. Villages that had once flourished had slowly been drained of all their resources and were forced to serve in the king's empire of greed. However, this king was not always so feared. Long ago, this man had actually been a beloved figure to all villages across the land. He would supply starving villagers with food and help build up their homes. He had even invented iron golems to protect the villages from danger. But now the king was taking crops from these villages and selling them back to his subjects at a high price. Instead of the iron golems protecting villages, they now enforced the king's law. He even forged a special diamond golem to serve as his personal bodyguard. This once loved king had become a feared tyrant. He believed that nothing could bring him down. But as time went on, one villager remembered the past and wanted revenge. Years later, Robin had grown into an adult, but he remained haunted by his father's death. He could sense that the other villagers wanted change, but were too afraid to voice it. Robin wasn't afraid to be their voice. Village to village, spreading word of the king's misdeeds.
The king is a tyrant who will kill anyone and take anything he pleases. If we choose to willingly serve under his rule, then we are choosing to enable his evil ways.
Most were too terrified of the king's power to listen, and tried their best to ignore what they believed to be the ramblings of a crazy child. However, Robin never gave up hope and was eventually able to get through to some. These villagers had also been tormented by the king's greed. Most had lost their crops, some their wealth, and others their families. They had had enough and wanted vengeance. Together, they made a plan, and once night fell, they began destroying every iron golem in their village. With each one that was slain, more and more townspeople began to wake up and take notice. And as the final golem fell, the dust settled, and the group of rebels were quickly surrounded by the villagers and praised for their heroic action. This village had been liberated from the king. For the first time in ages, hope had been sparked in these villagers' hearts. Over the coming months, this movement would spread further. More villages were freed, and even more villagers were recruited. As these attacks became more frequent, the king began to take notice, and he was furious.
If these ungrateful villages turn their backs on me again, then they'll all pay for it.
Back when the king was still a much-loved villager, he and his son had just finished delivering food to a struggling village. As they were leaving, they were robbed by the very villagers that they had just helped. Now left with nothing, they set off back to their home. As they traveled, the son wandered off, and after realizing his son wasn't following behind him, the villager looked around in a panic. Eventually, he found his son lying on the ground. He had angered a nearby hive of bees and was poisoned as a result. Worried for his son's well-being, the villager frantically searched for any food in order to save his dying child. But it was too late. His son died. An intense anger raged through him as he blamed the other villagers for everything. He had helped feed them, built their homes, and this is how they repay him? From that point forward, the villager vowed that he was done giving. Now he would take. As the king remembered his past, his anger grew even stronger, and he decreed that taxes be raised even higher. While the villages under the king's control were becoming more desolate, the villages liberated by Robin were beginning to flourish once again. Eventually, Robin had enough troops to start hitting the king where it would hurt him the most. They would attack his outposts, then return the looted riches and crops back to the people. The king could not stand idly by while he was being made a fool, so he went off in search of these rebelling villages. Eventually finding one, the king decided to make an example out of them. He sent in his iron golems and ordered them to destroy everything and everyone. News quickly spread of the king's mad rampage, though instead of scaring the other villages into submission as he had hoped, the king's example had done just the opposite. Even more villages began to revolt, exponentially increasing Robin's influence. His cause had spread across the whole kingdom, and even some of the king's own iron golems were switching sides. Outpost after outpost was robbed, while village after village was freed. The rebellion began to craft better armor and weapons, making them stronger by the day. As the resistance grew, even some within the king's walls began to take action. It seemed as though Robin's forces were always one step ahead, so the king decided to meet with his advisors, which were growing fewer by the day.
How is it we're losing? We need to stop this madness now!
Sire, if I may, maybe we could try reasoning with these rebels.
The rest of his advisors muttered in agreement.
Reason with them? Have you all lost your minds? They want me dead!
The king had been suspicious, but this confirmed his fears. His own advisors were secretly aiding the uprising. Without hesitation, he had them all thrown into the castle dungeons. This paranoia began the king's downward spiral of isolation. He would lock anyone up for anything. Even the slightest look in the wrong direction would be enough to anger him. The only thing that the king trusted was his diamond golem. The diamond golem had been with him for years, and he took some peace knowing that he still had one friend left in this world. As this was ongoing, Robin and his forces were continuing their campaign across the kingdom, plundering more from the king, and marching ever closer towards his castle. As the king lost more of his riches, he began to struggle with creating more golems for his army. This weakened the king's power considerably, and he knew it. Fear of loss and long periods of isolation deteriorated his sanity even further. One day, while locking away one of his chefs for overcooking his pork, he was called out by his oldest advisor.
Please, sire, you don't need to do this. Don't you remember the villager you used to be?
The advisor reminded the king of his once kind-hearted nature and how he had been loved by all. This, however, sent the king into a frenzy. He remembered how the villagers hated him, how they robbed him, and how they killed his son. Just then, a panicked villager ran to the king and exclaimed that his eastern vault had just been robbed. They had nearly lost everything, and the rebellion was now only half a day away from reaching the castle. The king suspected once again that this was the work of someone on the inside. This was the final straw. He immediately ordered his golems to imprison any villagers that remained on the castle grounds, and after they were all locked up, he vented his struggles to his diamond golem before thanking him for being his only friend. The king then left, knowing that he must do something drastic if he is to reclaim what is his. The king sent what remaining golems he had to the east, in the hopes that they might slow down Robin's forces. He then frantically ran to his library in search of the answer to all his problems. Eventually, he found what he had been searching for, a long-forgotten book that contained information on the Dark World's forbidden magic. He had heard many legends of a dark force that resided within a mountain temple, and knew that it was his last hope. The king fled his castle in a hurry. A figure watched from the shadows, before heading off in the direction of Robin's forces. An hour later, Robin and his army had just finished defeating the last of the king's iron golems when one of his men ran up to him and told him that there was trouble in the village square. Robin ran over to see the imposing frame of the king's diamond golem.
I was wondering when you'd show.
The diamond golem handed Robin a piece of paper. Robin thanked the golem and then read the letter aloud to his men.
The king has left his castle unguarded. Now is the time to strike!
While the rebellion was preparing their attack, the king was still searching for a way to restore his power. At long last, he finally found the Temple of Legend. Upon entering, the king was drawn to an odd configuration of gold blocks, before realizing what it was.
This is it! The altar! Finally, he'll be able to take back what's mine!
Reading through the book once more, the king pulled out redstone torches, and after placing them all around the golden frame, he ignited the top. The king was met with a blinding flash of light, and as his eyes settled, he took notice of the figure now standing in front of him.
Who dare summon Herobrine?
It is I, Dark One, the Villager King. I demand that you restore my power and wealth so that I may crush those who oppose me and regain control of my kingdom.
Herobrine silently stood where he had been summoned.
Well, are you going to help me or not?
Herobrine didn't answer. He just continued to look with his unblinking, pure white eyes. The king began to feel uncomfortable and was about to ask again when Herobrine interrupted.
I have a better idea.
As he said this, he cast a spell on the Villager King, knocking him backwards. The king staggered and momentarily blacked out. He awoke seconds later. Something was wrong. He tried to open his eyes, but he couldn't. Or were his eyes already open? He could feel his eyelids moving as he blinked, but he couldn't see.
I'm blind!
Herobrine chuckled to himself.
No! I must see! I must be able to see!
Now maybe you'll think twice before wasting my time.
In another flash of light, Herobrine was gone. The king stumbled out of the temple. Now blind and filled with cowardice, he was left with only one option. He had to flee the kingdom, or he would surely be killed. And so, he ran. Much later, at the king's castle, Robin and his men were finishing up their raid. Even though they had taken back all of their once stolen wealth, Robin was left unsatisfied. He still longed to avenge his father, and hoped that the king would eventually return to his castle so Robin could finally deliver his long-awaited justice. Suddenly, he heard a loud noise coming from the throne room. He rushed in to see the Villager King stumbling around. In his attempt to avoid his fate, the king's blindness had turned him around, causing him to wander right into the hands of the very person he was trying to escape. Robin walked up to him.
This is the end. You've lost.
The king got up and looked around frantically, trying to determine the direction of the voice. This confused Robin, but he pressed on, throwing the king an iron sword.
Here, pick it up and fight me.
The scared and confused king crouched down in fear.
What is going on? Please, give me a chance. I don't want to fight.
I'm giving you more of a chance than you gave my father. Now fight!
The king attempted to flee, but ran into a wall. Robin slowly walked up and stood over him. He had wanted revenge for his father more than anything in the world. Yet, this king was now nothing but a sniveling coward. Iron golems were one thing, but was it right for him to kill a blind and unarmed man out of hatred?
I'll let you live, but you are to be banished to the farthest reaches of the Farlands, never to be seen again.
No, you can't do this to me!
Yes, I can. Guards!
Before the former king of the villagers stumbled out of his castle for the last time, he would continue to shamble through Minecraft until eventually reaching the edge of the world, where he was to live out the rest of his days. After witnessing the uncontrolled greed of the king, villages everywhere agreed to mostly trade in emeralds, as they believed it to be a more humble currency. Robin continues to help villagers to this day, delivering fresh supplies in the same way the richest villager had once done before. However, less is known about the disgraced Villager King. While he was banished to the Farlands years ago, some say he's still out there, preparing for his eventual return.